Let's turn then to Professor Robert Toombs, Professor Emeritus of French History at the University of Cambridge. Professor, thank you very much indeed for your time this evening. Can you trace a link between the French Revolution and the protests on the streets of Paris today?
Yes, I think I can, but not wholly a simple one. I think, that France's history since the Revolution has been in many ways trying to get back to a monarchy. We think of the French and they think of themselves as deeply anti-monarchist, but for much of their history since 1789, they've either had monarchies or they've tried to get monarchies. And what they've now ended up with is what many people call a republican monarchy. That's to say the imperial presidency of Charles de Gaulle and his successors, including Emmanuel Macron. And I think that it means that the French government is often rather out of touch with feeling in the country, rather more than ours tends to be, because the monarchical presidency, the republican monarchy, tends to stay rather distant from its people, and therefore they're often taken by surprise when people don't like what they're doing.
Do you think I overstate the case when I make the point that there are things that seem to be happening, even recently in France, which couldn't necessarily happen here? The most obvious example being that open letter written by retired generals suggesting a military coup, a coup d'etat, in the event of civil war. That couldn't happen here.
I don't think it could, because and the problem with the present republican system, and perhaps with all republics, is that the head of state, and hence the commander-in-chief of the army, is a politician. And politicians, by definition, cannot command the loyalty of everybody. And so a lot of France's elected politicians have found themselves in some sort of conflict with their armed forces, whereas we're lucky, I would say, I think you'd agree, that we have a head of state to whom the armed forces can pledge a personal loyalty. And that is quite a good barrier against the armed forces getting involved in politics.
As somebody, Professor, I presume, who spent pretty much most, if not all, of your working life in education, do you think we don't focus enough on the lessons from history, especially from the French Revolution?
We don't really focus on many lessons from history at all. I mean, surprisingly, for a country that has a reputation of being interested in its past, we teach our children very, very little history, and far less than in most European countries. So I think, as you were suggesting, the list of things that people who've done history at school will not know is very long indeed, and the French Revolution is one, the Russian Revolution is another. Apart from Henry VIII and Hitler, you're not going to leave school with an awful lot of knowledge of the way that politics works, unfortunately.
My particular point, and I speak as somebody with teenage children whose views haven't been tested by exposure to reality, but are often surprisingly radical. And they tell me of friends who are quite open about embracing things like revolutionary communism. And therefore I wonder whether the French Revolution in particular, I mean, you could equally, I suppose, talk about the Russian Revolution too, but the French Revolution, because it's so close, physically so close, offers particular lessons in how the idea of the perfectibility of human nature actually is just a load of old guff.
Well, that's of course the basis of, I suppose, all conservative philosophies, is that we're imperfect people and we have to try to do the best we can with an imperfect system, rather than trying to design something perfect from scratch and expecting it all to work. I mean, utopianism is a very dangerous thing, and the French Revolution sets the pattern. They start off by calling it the year one. The calendar's changed, everything changes, and it's got to be something entirely new. And Edmund Burke, at the time, great Irish politician and philosopher, wrote that. He called it the fairyland of philosophy. And I think people, if they don't know how these stories end up, which is often, as you said, rather badly, very badly in many cases, are too willing to trust that everything will go right if only you can get the right philosophy and get the right answer. And it doesn't work like that.
And as the French look back at their revolutionary history, we saw that contorted statement of a few months ago at the 200th anniversary of the death of Napoleon Bonaparte from Emmanuel Macron. He's not quite a hero, he's not quite a villain. They're not sure.
No, they're not sure. It's very difficult. Because in many ways, Napoleon is the man who, more than any other individual, made modern France what it is, made the French state, set up the model. And yet he's also the man who reintroduced slavery into the West Indies. and who fought a great many wars, got a great many people killed. So how do you balance the two? You know, the greatest ever Frenchman, but these are the black sides of his history. And it is very difficult to balance them. And I think the French have often found Napoleon really rather embarrassing.
Do you think the French look across the Channel and look at our monarchy and think, if only we had one? And do you think in that context we value them? And I don't mean them, the family, I mean the institution of constitutional monarchy. Do you think there are enough people who are sufficiently wedded to the concept to see it through the next few decades, when unquestionably there will be efforts made by modern-day Republicans to dislodge them?
Well, I think one thing a revolution does to you, and it certainly did to the French, is to make you think about the politics and the system that you have. Whereas we tend to think it's sort of always been there. What's the Queen for? Well, she's a sort of celebrity, it's part of celebrity culture, it brings in the tourists. What we very rarely think, which the French often have thought in the past, is what exactly do you need in a head of state? And as I said, they tried actually quite a lot to bring the monarchy back. And it's very possible they would have still had a Napoleon had they not lost a succession of wars. And, we've been lucky partly because we haven't lost many wars lately. And it's that really that overturns your whole system and you find yourself having to start again from scratch. But yes, I think we ought to think more about the way the monarchy helps our politics work, rather than seeing it simply as a kind of show business spectacle. It's a lot more than that.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that the truth is also they need that flip side, don't they? People will decry what's happened with Harry and Meghan, but it keeps them front and centre, it keeps them in the public eye. And also, if you take the view, as I do, that actually the first family are there for us in a sense to sort of superimpose all the family dynamics that go wrong in every family, brothers not getting on, for instance, in this particular instance, they serve that purpose too.
Yeah. Well, a monarchy is, you could say, it humanises the state. It gives the state a human face. But you have to accept in that case, human beings are human. They will make mistakes, things will go wrong in their lives. And of course, the Queen is remarkable because so little has gone wrong. She's done so much that has been right. And we have to just hope that her successors will have part of her wisdom and her dedication to duty, of course.
Yeah, well, we live in hope, don't we? And Robert Toombs, we appreciate your contribution this evening. Thank you ever so much. Thanks a lot.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.